It's the same with teeth.
Majorca!
Mjorka.
Taste, different box, different shop.
Well, folks, it's time to kick it old school.
For just about as long as video games as a whole have existed, so have the licenses to create them based on pretty much anything you can think of. From the obvious movies and TV shows to celebrities and fast food restaurants, nothing was safe. With video games gaining enormous popularity in the 80s, kids were swapping their sacred TV time from the product placement-filled, ad-break-riddled TV shows to these incredible interactive adventures, far away from the clutches of the marketers.
Can I ask you something? Who does your tampons?
But of course, the bigwigs in suits quickly realised that this new medium was actually the perfect way to get their products in front of the impressionable masses' eyes. Since then, we've had thousands of licensed games, and there's no doubt you've played a handful of them for yourself. From action movies to cartoon series, kids' toys and action figures to food and drink companies. There's a good chance that if a property became even remotely popular, a slew of licensed games were sure to follow. I still have amazing memories of growing up playing GoldenEye, numerous Spider-Man games, and of course, The Simpsons Hit and Run, being one of my favourites to this day, despite finding it a little frustrating in the past few years.
Nah, I can't do it. I've gone art as I have now, because it's pure rage. It is pure rage. I'm done, I can't do it. I'm done. I am f***ing done.
Licensed games can be awesome, combining two worlds into one incredible journey. Or 60. That's not what I wanted to take a look at today. Oh no. Today, I wanted to take a look at the weirdest licensed games I could find. Games that have absolutely no business even existing. But can something beautiful emerge from the obscurity, or was branching out to gaming just a little too much for some of them? Being a 90s kid, I grew up listening to punk rock music, skateboarding, and watching MTV. And like many, one of my favourites was Jackass. But it wasn't just a part of my childhood, it was a huge slice of the subculture I was submerged in. And to this day, I'm still a massive fan of both Jackass and the other TV shows it's influenced along the way. I didn't really want to focus on any TV or movie-based games today, as that's a whole other minefield, but this one in particular is pretty damn weird. I mean, out of all the TV shows to base a video game on, one about a group of mates torturing, puking on, and flinging shit at each other for our amusement wouldn't be top of my list. There's no story or ongoing plot, or even any consistency from episode to episode. It's just random one-off skits and stunts, which obviously does make the show as enjoyable as it is, but how do you even translate that into a game? Well, you make a minigame collection, of course. Jackass The Game released in late 2007 for the PS2 and PSP, with the DS release then coming a few months later. Today, we'll be taking a look at the PS2 version of this game, which was developed by New Zealand's Side. Or City? Hang on.
She.
Oh really? Okay, she. They are responsible for Barbie Beach Vacation and Madagascar carts though, so at least we know we're in good hands here.
Look at me, giddy with the speed and the burning rubber and the rubbing engines. Vroom, vroom!
The premise of the game is Jeff, the director of Jackass, has managed to mess himself up during filming, so has brought us in to oversee the production of new episodes, needing us to earn enough money from each episode to move on to the next. You earn yourself some money by completing different goals in each minigame. This can just involve high scores, but will also be more specific, like racing against the clock whilst ragdolling yourself down the side of a cliff, or throwing yourself into an informational booth whilst tearing ass around a mini golf course. Each episode contains 5 scenes or minigames, and although some of them are just reskins, for the most part, there's a great mix of different styles to play, and a majority of them are super fun. We can play bumper cars on rooftops, reenact the rhythm-based party boy scene, grind along fences and jump cop cars while street wakeboarding, and bomb down some city streets in a shopping trolley. They did a great job of adding in some more memorable scenes from the show and making them work as minigames, as well as some downright absurd stuff that, whilst not exactly realistic, fits the feeling of the show and adds some variety to the game. It was always interesting to load into the next game and see what depraved acts we'd get to indulge in for the next few minutes. Honestly, I enjoyed my time with most of the games we get, but there are a few that just don't really work that well, and this is due to one or two reasons. Reason one being, well, some of them are just pretty boring. Games like Rock, Paper, Scissors are fun enough the first time through, mainly just to see the actual dialogue and character interactions play out, but when going for higher scores, the replays can become pretty bland pretty quickly. The second reason I didn't enjoy a few of them just comes down to the controls. Most of the time, despite being a tad dated, they work fine for what we need, but there are a few games in particular that really struggle with them. Like, there's this unicycle game with Steve-O, leaving us to make our way through a short obstacle course, balancing with the left stick while navigating a few different paths and jumping over obstacles. But for the life of me, after 20 seconds or so, I just felt like the balance bar would violently swing one way, not giving me a chance to adjust accordingly and ultimately leading to me falling over and over again.
Yeah, it is possibly a me issue, but I would like to think that the last decade and a half of Tony Hawk's game have provided me with at least some level of virtual balance.
The other game that stood out to me for odd controls was the Steve-O slingshot level. You set your position, your height, and your power, and are then tasked with flying across the level and making it to, landing on, or breaking certain targets. But no matter what I tried, I really couldn't even get a decent launch, let alone make it to or hit any of the targets needed. Luckily, all of the games are pretty short, so it's not like you're getting stuck on a section for hours on end, and all of the target scores you need to earn money are incredibly generous, so you'll most likely pass within a few tries even if you're struggling on certain games. It does all probably err on the side of being a little too easy, but I mean, realistically, if you're playing Jackass the Game, you're probably not looking for some super in-depth 60-hour experience. You're looking for a few easygoing, fun-filled hours with the crew. I can just imagine how stoked I would have been putting this one up at the time, or getting a few friends together on a Saturday night, just to blast through a few hours of competitive egg eating with the game's included multiplayer mode.
And I do feel like there's a bit of a ceiling on how good a minigame collection can actually be.
And although some franchises have managed to really push the genre to its limits, overall, a lot of these games are quickly pushed out with only a handful of games repeated and not much else. But Jackass the Game, even with its flaws, is actually way better than it has any right to be. It looks pretty great for a PS2 game with these impressive character models that really didn't need to be there, but it's cool that they are. It shows that the team behind the game put the effort into making this as good as they possibly could, and really wanted to make sure this game was as close to a Jackass experience as it could be. Most of the cast are present in the game with the exception of Bam, who unfortunately couldn't appear due to contractual obligations with Activision. But not only do they all provide voiceover, but fully mocap themselves too. Again, it really doesn't feel necessary, but the fact that they did just adds so much authenticity to the game.
My nuts are in my throat, dude.
A big part of why Jackass was so enjoyable, to me at least, was the chemistry between the cast.
It started out as a group of mates just fucking around and filming it, and basically continued being that for over 20 years. And that chemistry is portrayed perfectly throughout the game. The little cutscenes before a game starts are them kicking each other in the nuts, and the little quips and insults they throw at each other during them. It really makes you feel like you're actually playing through an episode of the show, and I think that was one of the most important things for them to achieve with this one. Even the music choices and the menu designs bleed that early 2000s teenage angst, meaning that this doesn't just feel like a Jackass game, it's really earned the right to be called Jackass The Game.
I don't really have much more to tell you all about this one, unless you wanted like a tier list of each minigame or something.
But I can recommend checking this one out to anyone that grew up with the show and wants a little nostalgia mixed with an admittedly super weird but surprisingly fun few hours. Playboy, an entity that I've always found mildly confusing. Not because of the content they produce, that's pretty self-explanatory.
But because when I was in school, every then teen girl was obsessed with it.
Brandishing that bunny on clothing, jewellery, pencil cases, and even bedsheets and curtains.
I don't know, I just always found it a weird choice for youngsters.
Like, why is this fine, but this would be weird?
Anyway, with all the merch Playboy was pushing out in the early 2000s, it only makes sense, but also kind of makes absolutely no sense whatsoever that a game would follow.
Yep, that's right. Playboy The Mansion, the game, it's a thing. And I have absolutely no idea who it's for. You have to remember that back before digital gaming and online shopping was the norm, the only games you would get in were the ones your parents approved and provided for you. Unless you were lucky enough to have an older cool big brother or something. But I can't imagine too many kids were waking up to this one sat under their Christmas trees. And for everyone else that was old enough to get it for themselves, well, they could already get other stuff that eliminated the need for blocky PS2 boobies.
It's porn. The other stuff is porn.
So, confusing target market aside, what are we going to be getting up to in Playboy The Mansion? Well, the game released in early 2005 for PS2, Xbox and PC, and to boil it down completely, is basically a Sims ripoff, just with sex and stuff. Like, a lot of sex and stuff. We take control of Hugh Hefner, who, for anyone that isn't aware, founded Playboy, finding fame with their incredibly successful lifestyle and wellness, aka porn before the internet magazines. The game requires us to build up the Playboy empire from scratch, kitting out the infamous mansion, hiring staff, photographers, journalists, and of course some lovely ladies to produce and distribute Playboy magazines. Our magazine sales then give us more money to buy better equipment, hire more experienced staff, and get the attention of more famous girls, making each magazine issue more successful than the last. If you've played any other Sim-style game in your time, then you pretty much know what you're getting here, but with more sex and stuff, of course. My first issue with it is, well, not an issue with the game itself, but I just don't personally enjoy these types of games on console. I grew up with The Sims on PC and always found the jump to controller too jarring. I know I could have alleviated this issue by playing the PC version, but trying to find and run a 17-year-old computer game is a lot trickier than you may think.
Warning, your computer has been locked, you dirty little pervert.
But despite that, everything that's here works well enough. You can free roam around the mansion, buying new products and ornaments to display, upgrade your office with some sleek flooring and wallpaper, have a little boogie to some 2000s frat rock, and interact with the girls to tell some jokes, build your business relationship with them, or for the wildly perverted ones of you out there, change their clothes or remove them entirely. Blocky PS2 boobies aside, there are some nice systems in place that make sense in the context of a Playboy game. Like, we can throw parties at the mansion, which we then use to build relationships with various people. We can try chatting up different models to ask them for cover shoots, or share a few stories with famous rock stars in the hopes of landing that big interview for the magazine. Then, if you manage to build your relationships with the girls enough, you can ask them to become a permanent part of the mansion, continuing to grow that relationship to give and receive advice from the girls, making sure they're happy and fulfilled, and, well, have sex and stuff. You're going to be tasked with completing 12 main missions throughout the game to progress, but since there's no time limit on any of these, you can just mess about for as long as you want. But it quickly becomes apparent that there's just not much different to do after the first hour, and that's my biggest issue with this one. Whilst there is plenty of girth, the game as a whole just lacks any sort of depth. I'm so sorry for saying girth.
But in conclusion, I didn't bother seeing this one through to the end, because after the first 2 hours or so, it just becomes boring.
Yeah, I'm still talking about the game, by the way. Once the novelty of it being a Playboy game with PS2 boobies wore off, you're just kinda left with an uncensored Sims game, but not as good. I think the devs were really relying on the novelty and horny factor to be enough to keep people engaged with this one, which is fine. I mean, what are you expecting with the Playboy game? But it's just a shame they couldn't make the actual gameplay as intriguing as the concept. To state the obvious, SeaWorld is an American sea life display and water theme park company, mostly known these days due to the controversial decision to kidnap and keep killer whales despite years and years of public scrutiny and protest. Despite where you may sit morally on keeping these incredible creatures captive so popcorn-eating parkgoers can stare at them through glass, I don't think the idea of a water park sim is all that weird. We had already seen the massive popularity of sim-style games and theme park builders at this point, so it was only a matter of time before a company would slap their logo on the cover and cash in. Pardon? Oh, it's not a water park builder? Okay. As I was saying, Shamu's Deep Sea Adventure is an underwater adventure game where we play as none other than Shamu the killer whale. Is that right? Yeah, it's just fucking weird though. Yeah, fine. So the game opens to the most formidable music they could have picked for this one, and I don't know why. We're following what could either be a very happy whale showing off and playing around, or one frantically trying to escape a terrifying threat. After this fever dream-esque intro, we're then welcomed by a much more uplifting menu screen. Starting a new game, we're introduced to Horatio the Manatee, who's here to teach us the basics.
I will always tell you what you will need to keep this bar full.
Yep, okay, we've got our standard health and air meters.
Blue semicircle is your air, your oxygen.
Yep, all pretty self-explanatory.
These bubbles are your food.
Collect those for health. Yep.
You can collect fabulous photos of SeaWorld.
Dude, come on, you can just tell us about those later.
These are the sea mines.
Horatio.
And one more thing about the mines.
Bro, I'm fucking 7. I forgot literally everything you said more than 15 seconds ago. Just let me play the game. Okay, finally. Oh, Jesus Christ. So, not only do you have to sit through a drawn-out tutorial section, but then he will literally retell you everything he just told you again immediately after. We're not getting off to the flying start I was expecting here, but I'm sure we'll get into the first level soon enough. What the hell is that? Horatio, help! Why wasn't this motherfucker a part of the tutorial, huh? We're immediately thrown into a chase section, trying our best to escape from the Kraken whilst collecting these Kraken crystals for some reason, which I'm sure our friend explained to us in depth a few moments ago. We follow the directions displayed on the screen to collect enough crystals, avoid his attacks, and eventually escape. Where the hell did that come from? So, now that everything's settled down a little bit, this is where the game opens up to what will be the majority of our playthrough. We're given an area of the ocean to explore, and in this first level, we need to rescue Horatio, who somehow managed to escape SeaWorld during the Kraken chase and then get imprisoned in some rocks. Each level is packed full of enemies, way more crystals, a few optional collectibles, and puzzles. Well, puzzle. See, within these areas, you need to collect enough Kraken crystals, and then collect different keys to unlock doors, which will then need you to solve a not very interesting or difficult puzzle. The exact same puzzle every time. I mean, samey puzzles aren't the biggest deal in the world, but unfortunately, what you're seeing in this first level is about 90% of what the game has to offer. A majority of the game is now exactly the same as what you've just done. We'll move through new areas that need you to collect keys and crystals to unlock the same puzzle doors to then move on. The issue on top of that is, well, the actual areas themselves are pretty much identical throughout the game too. If I show you gameplay of the first, second, third, and even fourth level of the game, it would be very difficult for anyone to pick which is which.
It's just so weird. It's like the game starts off as slow as possible, only to ramp all the way up to 100 to just as quickly plummet back down to a crawl.
It's just not very fun with a load of strange decisions. Like, they tried their best to make these vibrant underwater environments, but unfortunately also made them all super messy, making it difficult to determine what's just foreground decoration and what is an obstacle that can actually hurt you. The enemies will also swarm you, meaning you just get stuck bouncing between a few of them, and on top of that, the combat is next to useless because it just stuns the enemy for a few seconds, so by the time you start moving away from them, they just attack you again. I mean, this never becomes too much of an issue as the game is incredibly easy, but it's just a really boring and quite frustrating experience. After the second level, I basically just left my map open, which by the way is something they decided to leave out of the 14 minutes of tutorial, just so I could complete each level as quickly as possible to hopefully get something a little more engaging. They do try to mix the gameplay up sometimes, like with the levels where we now have to chase the Kraken to his lair instead, but outside of the few chase levels and some boss battles, we just swim around different areas completing the same few tasks over and over.
As soon as the gameplay falls short, it's very difficult to keep me engaged with the game.
I can forgive a shallow story or boring characters if there's a fun gameplay loop to keep me busy, but I think it's quite apparent that I'm not a massive fan of what this one presents us with. What I do want to talk about a little more though is the story that they went with on this one, but I'm gonna prepare you, it's fucking bonkers. To prove my point, in what is another super strange decision, they literally tell you what's going to happen at the start of a level with these comic style sections voiced over by Horatio. But even though I knew what was going to happen before it even happened, I still couldn't believe what was happening. About 40 minutes through the game, Horatio just casually mentions that we're heading to the lost city of Atlantis.
Source of all evil.
The source of all evil? Since when has Atlantis even been the source of any evil? With that bombshell nestled in my brain, we swim around a few more areas doing the same old, when again, out of nowhere, we are now told about Poseidon. You know, the Greek god of the sea? Yet, Well, he's now a part of this because of course he is, and it turns out him and the giant kraken are in fact working together to raise the lost city of Atlantis out of the ocean to replace SeaWorld once and for all.
But why would this be of any benefit to him at all?
Is he planning on running Atlantis like SeaWorld? Charging the general public to visit the city and sell them overpriced merchandise and under-food-grade corn dogs?
Like, what's his end goal here? It just comes so out of left field that I actually had to go back and rewatch some of the cutscenes just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. But nope.
There's no build-up, no hints or reasoning behind any of it. 1 minute, we're just a big whale chilling in SeaWorld, and about 100 minutes and a storyboard later, we're now battling the god of the sea to stop his diabolical plan to become a franchisee. Once we've foiled Poseidon's plans for good, we're then given our last type of gameplay in the form of this rhythm-styled minigame, performing for our adoring fans back where we belong, ensuring kids everywhere know that whales love SeaWorld just as much as they do. Forget weird licensed games, this game is just straight weird. I can't say I didn't get a little bit of enjoyment out of the bizarreness of it all, but as far as the game itself goes, there's just not too much here to see when all is said and done. Oh, and by the way, it turns out they did in fact make a SeaWorld park simulator, but I think for today at least, I've seen about as much as I can take from SeaWorld.
Welcome to the landscape of television now that WWE owner Mr. McMahon controls all the networks.
Sports and video games have gone hand in hand for a while now, and although a majority of them aren't really something that I've invested much of my time into, mainly due to my lack of interest in many sports or even much physical activity at all to be honest, it's clear to see that sports titles are still one of the most popular genres of video games to this day, with FIFA, Madden and NBA still raking in monstrous amounts of money despite what seems to be declining enthusiasm from their fanbase year on year.
It's a joke! It's an absolute joke!
I myself have enjoyed a select few sports titles in my time, with the Tony Hawk series being one of my favourites to this day. I can also remember spending a lot of my childhood playing No Mercy for the N64. Yep, I was a big WWE fan for a lot of years as a youngster.
Eagerly waiting on a Sunday morning to plonk myself down in front of the living room TV
and watch big sweaty men throw themselves at each other in skin-tight spandex. And Trish Stratus, of course. Starting all the way back in 1987, we've since seen over 40 WWE titles released across multiple console generations.
Why are you talking about WWE games in a video about weird licensed games?
But why are we talking about a WWE game in a video about weird licensed games, I hear you ask?
Well, because in 2002, THQ decided to release WWE Crush Hour, a confusing fusion of the world of wrestling entertainment and Demolition Derby style car combat. Naturally. So the premise basically boils down to Vince McMahon, the head of the WWE organization,
I've got grapefruits of steel,
taking over every television network and pumping out a whole host of different shows featuring our favourite on-screen superstars. One of those shows, of course, being Crush Hour, because, you know, the name of the game we're playing. The game lets us pick our preferred wrestler before putting us in the driver's seat of a customised car, entering an arena in the hopes of being the last man standing, using our car-mounted guns and a few different collectible power-ups to help make that happen. So, let's see who we've got. Yeah, obviously our boy Dwayne with his bull-fronted sports car. Kurt Angle repping the All-American Soccer Mobile. Oh, Rikishi coming in with an all-powerful steamroller, baby. We've got a good selection of the expected choices here, and it is cool to flick through and see their themed vehicles based on their wrestling personas. You know, like how The Undertaker has caskets on his famous motorbike, and how Kane has a truck covered in flames to represent his facial deformities that he got in the fire that also killed his mother.
Remind me again why our parents let us watch this on a Sunday afternoon.
Anyway, who else have we... Yeah, maybe let's not talk about him at all. Okay, and... Oh, sweet baby Jesus, what the hell happened to Rob Van Dam's damn head? Okay, let's just stick with Kane because it's 2002 and flames are the coolest. This is where we now start off season mode, or what you could just call this game's version of a story mode. This will put you through multiple events, combining a few different modes and maps, but essentially boiling down to you needing to defeat a certain number of the other wrestlers in order to win and move on to the next. There are a few different gameplay styles, but for a majority of my time, this was the main objective. The first event introduces us to the Raw-themed arena, pitting us against 3 other wrestlers. It is nice to see that each of the wrestlers have their OG walk-in music and accompanying videos, but it was even nicer for the devs to allow us to skip them because I can imagine this would get pretty old real quick. I will touch on the visuals very quickly because even though there's nothing groundbreaking here, it's not too bad. Most of the time, especially considering this was developed and sold at a much lower budget for the time. More importantly than that though, for a game in this genre, what does it feel like to control these cars? Well, it's bland. Not the greatest description for controls, I know, but it's the best way I can put it. We have a button to accelerate, one to boost, and another to use the power-ups we pick up from around the arena. But that's literally it. No option for any sort of drifting or aerial movements at all, and as a result of this limited control, the game as a whole just feels pretty boring to play. There's no nuance or learning curve to the driving at all, and the cars all feel pretty weightless, especially considering on screen you're smashing 2 huge trucks together at high speed, only for it to feel like you're smacking 2 packs of tissues together. Unfortunately, the shooting also suffers from this same blandness, only allowing you to shoot directly in front of you, which is fine, I get it. You don't want to confuse what I'm assuming would be a slightly younger target demographic for this game by needing independent driving and aiming controls. But they don't put any sort of cooldown on the guns at all, meaning myself, and I'm assuming most other people, just end up holding down the shoot button indefinitely, just focusing on picking up the power-ups which do most of the damage anyway.
Actually, I just thought of a better way of describing it. Forget bland, it's all just very unsatisfying to play.
Regardless, we managed to complete the first arena after a few minutes, so at least now we can see what the other gameplay styles will be. Okay, on to the second level to see what we have. Oh, it's exactly the same. Just now in a much larger level and needing us to finish off 10 of our competitors instead. Yeah, okay, let's forget this. Let's just try out Exhibition instead. At least this allows us to select what mode we want. Okay, let's try out this Iron Man mode and let's switch up the driver too. I'm gonna go for Trish because... handling reasons. So in this mode, it's pretty much exactly the same as before, but now instead of first to 5 or 10, it's just highest score within 3 minutes. But obviously this doesn't do anything to change up the gameplay in the slightest. The most interesting thing that happened here is I accidentally pressed the button to enter the game's first person mode, which is utterly terrifying.
Oh, you little bitch.
But was fun for a minute or two. I did try out a few more events, and there are in fact different types of gameplay. Like this mode where we'll need to grab onto the belt and then keep hold of it for 30 seconds to win. Or this other where we'll race around a large arena collecting stars as they appear, trying to destroy the other wrestlers, causing them to lose a point each time and avoiding the same thing happening to us. But in the end, it all comes down to those unsatisfying controls which really kill this game for me.
Look, I don't want to rag on this one too much. It's a bit of a silly idea that the devs put out at a budget price.
And although there's not the same level of quality or control that comes with other games in this genre, I'm sure fans of wrestling would have still had fun with this one at the time. Hell, I'm sure I would have too if I'd had this one when I was young. I remember all the shit I used to buy, play, and watch when I was a kid, just because one of my favourite characters was plastered on it somewhere.
As the creator of The Simpsons, this makes my eyes hurt.
Whilst we're here looking at one game that's just smushed a license onto a completely unrelated genre, I have got another one I wanted to share with you real quick. Ugh, we need a new idea, Chuck. The boss is breathing down my neck to get a new game out for the kids, and I just don't know what to do.
That's quite the conundrum there, Barry. Let's just have a think. What do kids like these days?
Well, I'm pretty sure they're into scooters. Yeah, I've seen loads of them on scooters lately.
Okay, great. But we need something unique. Something a little more than just a scooter game. What else do they like?
Oh, let me see. Crayons?
I can't imagine that's exactly how the Meeting of Minds went down when they conjured up this one. But regardless of its origin, it doesn't make Crayola Scoot any less weird. Maybe it's just me that finds this one odd, but I just think a children's crayon and art supply company doesn't seem like the most natural fit for an extreme sports game. It would be just like Colgate making a surfing game, or like Burger King making a kart racer. Oh, yeah, scratch that. Well, we may as well check this one out while we're here anyway. Welcome to Crayola Scoot. Released late into 2018 after being developed by Climax, which is a company name that should be nowhere near a product targeted at young children.
Flip.
It quietly came out to a very mixed reception from the few people who did manage to stumble across it, with the main criticisms taking aim at the very obviously inspired by but not as good as Splatoon gameplay. See, Crayola Scoot main gameplay is what you'd expect from a scooter game targeted at kids, but to warrant the inclusion of the brand name, the game has us performing tricks to spread our selected colour of paint around the environments. The more paint, the more points, with you also filling up your boost meter a lot quicker whilst riding over your own colour of paint, this giving you more speed to do bigger tricks to spread even more paint. It is obvious to see where the comparisons to Splatoon derive from, but come on, everything's a copy of something these days. That doesn't mean it can't be a fun and unique game on its own. I mean, it's definitely not, but it doesn't mean it couldn't have been. So what's my issue with this game then? Well, honestly, I feel like I'm repeating myself constantly throughout this video, but it all comes down to the control. They have tried to make a different layout than you would expect from this type of game, which obviously can work when done well. It's just like how Tony Hawk set the standard for any game in this style, and basically nailed it from the beginning, with tweaks and improvements made over the years to give even more control, only making the games more fluid and more fun to play. Then Skate comes along and completely shakes up how we play the game, but again, absolutely nails it, creating a game that is slightly more difficult to get used to, but one that is extraordinarily satisfying to get good at. But with Crayola Scoot, it really doesn't seem like much thought was given to how this would actually feel to play. I understand it's not the same thing to describe the controls to you over you actually trying them out for yourself, but hopefully this would at least give you an idea of why I found it so uncomfortable. So most of it is manageable, with the left stick being used for steering, the right trigger pushing with your foot, X is for boosting, and the left trigger or triangle is used for grinding. What I don't like though is how the tricks work on the right stick. So you press it forward to bunny hop or pull backwards before pushing forwards to perform a higher jump. But then when in the air, pushing forward will now perform a bar spin, or a tail whip by pushing left or right. But this double movement on the right stick is just clunky. Rather than one fluid motion to perform a certain trick like in Skate, these two movements feel quite disconnected. There are more advanced moves you can pull off by flicking and holding the stick in different directions when in the air, but I just couldn't ever reliably perform what I was trying to. To be honest with you, I spent most of my time just frantically flicking the sticks around at every opportunity, in the hopes of just landing something cool, and maybe that was the idea here for the younger audience. Another reason I think that's what they might have been going for is because even though bailing is a thing, the game is incredibly lenient with it. It doesn't seem to matter what angle I would land at, as the game would adjust when landing to prevent me from falling. But still, for me, the controls were just awkward, clunky, and super forgettable due to how unnatural they all feel. And that's just not something that I really want to put my time into learning when there's already better options out there anyway.
If myself, a pro gamer mad lad, struggled with this one,
I feel like a kid trying to play this would have even more of an issue. Saying that though, pretty much all 6-year-olds are rabid Fortnite gamer gods, paying off their parents' mortgages with their tournament winnings.
Y'all haters are already older than me, but y'all still talking shit. I'm a 9-year-old millionaire and I be smoking dope, bitch.
So I don't know, maybe I just struggled more with this one than the target audience would.
Aside from the questionable control choices, I just didn't find much else to get excited by. You get a modest-sized area that's basically an excuse to take you between the store, where you can buy customization items, the arcade, where you can play multiplayer, and the events themselves, which you can access through an event select screen. My gripe with this is, why take us back to the hub area to then have to ride forward for a few seconds to enter the level select to get into an event? Just take us straight back to the level select to begin with, so there's no breaks between the gameplay. Yeah, getting real nitpicky with this one, ain't I? The events themselves are nice and varied, with different game modes to compete in. It is great to see such a varied number of modes here, and with the game supporting up to 4-player split screen, I can imagine some super competitive games going on between groups of mates. It is disappointing to see that there's no online option for the co-op though, as something like this on the Switch would be pretty perfect for younger players looking to have a little bit of fun with their friends. These types of games are normally my chill out games. I can get lost in the gameplay for hours just flicking my fingers back and forth and chaining together those massive combos all across the level. but I just don't get the same satisfaction from this one. I did watch a few reviews online just to see how it was received in general, and there is a surprising amount of positive reception amongst YouTube reviewers. So, I don't know. Maybe it's just me that couldn't get to grips with this one. Or maybe it's the fact that I'm turning 30 and grumpy has become my primary personality trait. And maybe it's not entirely fair to look at this one as a direct competitor to the Pro Skater series. It's a different game made at a different time for a different audience. And I may even be looking at those earlier Tony Hawk's games through some rose-tinted nostalgia, in terms of how they felt to control at the time. If you have some younger kids in the household that want an entry point into this genre, or you yourself are curious to see if this can scratch the itch you've got waiting for Skate 4, there's no harm in trying this one out. But me personally, well, I'll stick to spending my time back in the hangar.
So we'll make this game the last one for today, but it's probably the weirdest of them all. Well, the game itself's not that weird, and neither is the license. But the backstory of its development and how it all came to be probably are.
Darkened Skye is a third-person fantasy adventure game, originally released for the PC back in 2002, with a GameCube port coming just a few months after. At first glance, this looks like your run-of-the-mill romp with some fantasy creatures, combat, spellcasting, the mandatory clunky platforming sections, and the sarcastic sidekick for a little comic relief. Explained to us through some terrifying 2002 3D animation, the plot follows Skye, a young woman who's been left a mysterious talisman by her mother, who has disappeared after a voyage.
Where are you?
She's now living in a world that has outlawed bright colours, ever since the Lord of Darkness, Necroth, has captured the rainbow, throwing us into an adventure to find our mother, take down the big bad, save the rainbow, and restore colour to the world once and for all. Still seems fine, right? Well, during the same cutscene, we see Skye stumble upon an ancient orange relic, emitting a strange light. This entrusts us with untold magical powers to aid us on our quest, and it's a Skittle.
Skittles?
Yep, a fucking Skittle is the source of magic in this game. Okay, so just to back up briefly, Darkened Skye's publisher, Simon & Schuster, had previously approached the Mars company to work on a couple of M&M games. Their logic being that having the candy-covered confectionery on the front cover would make it more popular to their audience, in the hopes of leading to more sales. This is when they approached producer Elizabeth Braswell to work on a Skittles game, with her turning it down initially. Eventually though, she used this as an opportunity to create the game she'd always wanted to. A fantasy adventure mixed with comedy, but now with Skittles of course. The Mars company had already tried putting out a series of fantasy-style adverts in the hopes of attracting older people back to the brand, with that same ad campaign being the driving force for Darkened Skye's plot. In all honesty, the comedic writing style and scripting worked out well for the game, taking a much more light-hearted approach to this genre.
She says her name is Ninu. What say we just call her Ninu?
Meaning, even though the inclusions of Skittles does feel a little odd in this one, the constant quips and fourth wall breaking feels more natural in this strange little vacuum. During development, they actually wanted to remove the inclusions of Skittles altogether, but due to them being so far along at the time, were forced to leave them in. But that's why we see absolutely no branding of Skittles anywhere on the front cover. Since they paid to use the license, they could include as much or as little as they wanted to. But I can't help but imagine the thousands of confused kids booting this game up back then, only to be greeted by a damn Skittle.
So the backstory is the weirdest part of all this, but once you get used to seeing Skittles pop up at random,
the rest of the game pretty much stands on its own. We may as well take a quick look at it while we're here though. After the opening cutscene, we're introduced to Drac, a sarky little gargoyle here to warn us that Necroth knows about our fruity little discovery and is kindly offering to take it off our hands. Drac tells us to make our way to see an old woman in the woods who can give us a little more info on the Skittles. This is where we get our first taste of gameplay, and controlling Skye here feels fine. It's all very fast and snappy. Although it's obviously very dated by today's standards, it's pretty easy to get used to after a few minutes. The only time I had any issue with the controls were during the platforming sections. Like with the jump being very floaty with the super sensitive controls, it's hard to predict where you'll land, or to even make small adjustments while jumping. But this doesn't really become much of an issue until a few later levels. The combat in this first area boils down to just spamming the left trigger to use our staff, while taking out a bunch of these hell demons. Not super exciting to start off with, but it all becomes a little less repetitive later on when we find more skills. See, combining different skills will create a range of magical spells that we can use, giving us more combat options as well as abilities to aid us while exploring. So each area will need us to fight some baddies whilst exploring to find different items, which in turn will help us gain other items to progress. The formula reminds me a lot of point-and-click adventure games actually, just with how everything works. But unfortunately, it also shares some of the randomness some point-and-click games seem to present you with, meaning it can all feel a little unfair and illogical at times. So when we're exploring this first area, we come across the old lady's house, but we need a password to enter. Looking around the same area, we then come across a cave that's too dark to enter, telling us we're going to need some form of light source. So we take a look around elsewhere. We enter a small market area with this little guy selling exotic animals, one of those being a glowfish. Seems like the perfect source of light we need, right? Well, we need to trade another creature with him to get the glowfish, so as you can see, the general blueprint of what we need to do is there. We know what pieces we need, but actually finding them, well, that's a different story. I ran around this first area for a good 15 minutes looking for any sort of creature I could interact with, but just couldn't find a single one. It wasn't until I retraced my steps back to the beginning of the level that I happened to check this tree that housed the little creature we needed.
It just seems weird to me to not even give us a small idea of where we should be looking.
But after making the trade for the glowfish, we make our way into the cave, blowing up some rocks which allow us to read the password off the wall, granting us access to the old lady's house. Also finding a rock that we can use as ammo for this giant catapult to take out this knobhead in a tree who keeps shooting us in the butthole. Entering the house, we're introduced to this beautiful creature, who gives us a rundown on the history of Skittles.
I'm sorry, I know this doesn't really matter, but it bothers me that she calls one Skittle a Skittles.
Is a Skittles?
Like, you have a bag of Skittles, but you eat a single Skittle. Nobody says pass me one Skittles, right? Anyway, she tells us how rainbows were real and that they would bring Skittles into the world. The Skittles would empower people with magic. But Necroth forged a dark prism to channel the rainbows to himself, keeping all of the Skittles and in turn the magic for himself. She now gives us a red Skittle to combine with our own, granting us the power of second sight, allowing us to see new portals in the world to take us to the next land. At this point, the game is sort of the same deal. Tracking down Skittles, taking out bad guys and meeting wacky characters, solving different puzzles to make our way through each land. It was here though that I needed to check a guide and realised what had taken them 22 minutes to get to had taken me an hour and 36 minutes.
So maybe I'm not the best person to be talking about this one.
It's absolutely bizarre, but honestly, I really like it. It's got a ton of personality and you can tell that there was genuine love and passion poured into the game, despite the weird license they had to accommodate.
Do I think you should rush out and play this right now? Probably not. But I feel the same way about most of the games in this video.
I don't think any of the games have been these amazing experiences I would recommend you put on your list to play immediately. I'd even warn you to actively avoid a few of them. But still, I'm so glad they exist. They're these weird little time capsules that remind us of a time that licensed games were a free-for-all, with companies trying to slap whatever character they could onto the front of the box, despite whether it made any sense whatsoever or not. They remind me of sinking hours into Rugrats Scavenger Hunt on the N64. Not because I loved the game, I didn't even like the game, but I loved the characters that it contained so much. I'm just glad they existed so that we can look back to a time where Duck Dynasty released a 3DS game. I'm not sure why, but I just like knowing that that happened. Truth is, we have so many amazing games and properties to enjoy these days, with incredible original stories and mechanics to get lost in. And we still get licenses in different forms throughout the industry, whether it's an existing franchise releasing a new branch of its story, or just a character appearing somewhere you wouldn't expect. But to me at least, they just never seem to have that same weird clunky charm that the games from previous generations managed to capture. I stumbled upon way more weird games than I was expecting when researching for this video. So as always,
just let me know if you want me to jump back into the weird world of licensed games at some point. But for now, thank you so much to anyone that's made it to this point in the video, and I really do hope you've enjoyed it. And I am sorry it's taken me as long as it did to get this one out, but I am working on the new one as we speak. So if you want to stay up to date with content from me in the future, don't forget to hit that little subscribe button, and I really do hope to see each and every one of you in the next video.